Good morning, Dr. Maydianne.
Good morning.
Andrade, and welcome to CSPC. Thank you for all your involvement with CSPC and its activities. We're happy to have you here, and we can begin the interview with my first question. So we see relatively few scientists that engage with parliamentarians. Mm-hmm. What do you think we can do to change that? And can you talk a little bit more about your journey as a fundamental biologist, scientist, to where you are now?
Certainly. I agree with you. Not enough scientists engage. And the basic problem is that we don't understand how to engage. It's a very different structure, interaction, style of interaction than what we're used to. I feel like more and more scientists are understanding science communication and its importance. Mm-hmm. So some of us are learning how to interact with the public. It's kind of another step to say, there's a difference between translating your research for broad understanding and translating to people who are decision makers why what you do is important, right? Not the specifics of what you personally are doing, but why the research in general, the enterprise is important. And we don't really get training for that. I think more and more institutions are offering that kind of training, but it's not always possible, and not everyone's comfortable with it. So let me pause for a minute. There's a few different reasons. One is scientists don't give themselves the time to do it. And I say give themselves the time because you could make time, but it's not formally part of your job. Yeah. Usually we don't get credit for it, yes. Right? Which makes it hard to do that when you have all these other responsibilities. The other is that I think it's fear. The idea of talking to a politician is not something we're trained in, exactly. Right? Yeah. Scientists don't like to do things that we don't have training in. I have no expertise, we'll say, right? Yeah. For myself, what really happened was as I became more engaged in questions around, especially equity and inclusion, while also developing sort of science communication side of my life, I realized I was already a tenured professor. The changes I wanted to see weren't for me, they were for the next generation. So that really requires changes in policy and in the understanding of what we need to do to change the system. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I started doing it. Got a lot of advice. Come to Ottawa regularly. It's about relationships, yes. And it's about narratives, not about facts, as much as narratives that are based on the facts.
Mm-hmm. So you think training early researchers or young students early on for something like this would also facilitate and give them confidence right from the beginning of their career?
I agree. Yeah. And so, for example, CSPC's internship programs, fantastic opportunities. Mm-hmm. Science Meets Parliament, yeah. More great opportunities to learn the language. Mm-hmm. I would say I caution really young people to diving in full bore until they have their career established, unless they want to actually do a policy career, which would be great. But I think having those skills is so important.
So moving on to the next question. So at CSPC, we've been discussing many different angles on the themes of empowering society, the transformative value of science, knowledge, and innovation. So the idea of empowerment seems to be at the heart of the Canadian Black Science Network, as we've also seen with other organizations. But the network seems relatively focused on STEM, science, technology, engineering, medicine. So what are your thoughts on that, and why is that?
Right. So we are like other organizations in the sense that we support a group that has been marginalized and for which there's a lack of opportunities. What that translates into for Canada is that people's talents aren't being utilized in the way that they could. But our society is different because it's both a professional society, multidisciplinary, research-based society. So our conference people give research talks. But we want to put people in career paths. Yes. And a lot of professional societies are a bit distanced from that. We want to put people into science and science adjacent career paths according to their interests and talents. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is the human rights issue, right? That's kind of central for us. We have young people with talent who are being pushed out of science because of stereotypes. We want to stop that. The other piece is that on the flip side, in the absence of Black researchers who are actually conducting the research, community doesn't trust it, they don't engage in that research, for example, in medicine, and then that perspective is not there. So the classic examples of people with skin color like ours, soap wouldn't work for us. Yeah. The pulse oximeter doesn't work for us, right? Yeah. Yeah. So we need diverse people in science, and we know that the Black perspective is an important one because it represents communities that right now aren't well represented.
Even with diseases, the way in different races or color, people of different colors, very different, and that's why involvement and perspectives, I guess.
Yeah. No, totally agree.
Yeah. And how do you? So there are many other Black societies like Society for Entrepreneurship. Do you see yourself, this society or this community for STEM, interacting with the other communities and getting learnings from them as well?
Definitely. And in fact, several of the Black-led accelerators for entrepreneurs, we've engaged with them. We have at both of our conferences, or our first two conferences, we had a panel on entrepreneurship for Black people who are in STEM. How do you make that transition? How do you find funders? We connect with them a lot. We go to their events, they come to our events. I think it builds the ecosystem.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And then you learn from each other, you advise each other.
Exactly.
Your experiences. Wonderful. Moving on to the next question. So, various relatively new federal programs are aimed at supporting Black scientists. So, why do you think that's necessary, and what do you see? Where does it go from here?
Right. So, I really appreciate you asking that question, because I've come to realize that a lot of the initiatives for Black community, even people in Black communities, don't understand how to explain to people why we need it, right? So the bottom line is we have literature that shows that discrimination is real. That Black children, for example, in the largest study that's been conducted so far in the Toronto District School Board, Black children were being streamed into applied courses that do not allow you to apply to university, regardless of their grades, right? We know that Black founders have a harder time getting funding. We know that Black philanthropic organizations have a harder time getting supporters, right? And so we can ignore these things and just say, well, let's make sure everything's fair. Or we can recognize that no, there is entrenched disadvantage. And if we want to utilize the talent in this community and also give us the human rights that Canada guarantees us, we need to figure out a way to redress it. And so Black Scholars Funding acknowledges that. And I've been really involved in that with the undergraduates, and they're so excited to learn that there's this opportunity, because they didn't even know the opportunity was there, right? Long term, what I would love to see is that we don't need them anymore, right?
That would be an ideal world.
Exactly, that we're represented in all of these different areas at the same proportion as we are at the university and in the population.
And it's just a normal way of life.
Exactly.
No,
if I could say one other thing, though, the thing people don't understand about these programs is that we're not dipping below the bar of excellence. What we're doing is illuminating for the outstanding people who aren't aware or weren't given the opportunity. These opportunities are there.
So it's the same level of excellence.
There you go.
I agree. So these are really significant changes to the ecosystem. So how do we ensure that the practice aligns with the policy in future, right now?
Yeah, in a sustained way. It's hard, right?
Yeah.
Systems change is hard, and I think one of the reasons it's hard is that we need policy. People who can think about the policy carefully, think about implementation, how to roll it out with our given structures, and the federal and the provincial and the way they interact. But then we also need education on the ground. And from my perspective, that's why in 2016 I started this Toronto Initiative for Diversity and Excellence with colleagues who agree, no matter what the policy, practice on the ground has to understand why the policy's there and act in a way that's consistent with the goals of the policy. And we were seeing that was not happening, not at all. For most of my career, I would sit in meetings and think, okay, so that's how that's going to work, right? People would post hoc justify decisions rather than in advance saying, okay, here's the way this decision might go wrong. Let's make sure that we tackle the potential for bias at the outset.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So you have mentored numerous trainees throughout your career for science, and so what advice would you give to scientists, young scientists, particularly from the underrepresented groups, that would consider a career transition? One is to engage in STEM first, and then once they are, and if they want to transition to a career in science communication and policy, what would your advice be to them?
I mean, I think what you said is one of the key things. I love that young people are so passionate. I worry for them if they start right off the bat in trying to make these enormous changes. Whatever you're doing, you need to learn. You need to sit, you need to listen, you need to come to events like this and just absorb it, meet people, ask about their paths and how they made their way into this world, and then be patient while acquiring these skills. But at the same time, do what you can.
Yeah.
So you have students who say, okay, I'm going to try this out by being in student governance, right? And that's a really good way to get these experiences. But the key thing is to kind of know yourself and to decide which path you're comfortable with. And don't feel like because the goal is so far away, you have to start right away, jumping to the goal. It's little steps, it's looking at your feet and being on the path. Yeah.
And trying to, see and get an experience of everything. And that's what, I guess, what you mean by...
Yeah. And actually as broadly as possible. So
yeah.
I think sometimes people think, oh, I have to be the president of the student association. No, you can volunteer to be on the governance committee for the budget. And you learn so much from that, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful. So one final question. So what is your opinion on the value of Canadian Science Policy Centre and its position in the community as a connection hub, knowledge mobilizer and a talent incubator? That's an important thing in the science and innovation policy landscape.
I would have to say that this is it, right? This society, this center, started my interest in activism when I was asked to be on a panel in 2013, and that experience really triggered a lot of understanding for me about why we needed these things to work together. The fact that there's so many young people here that are just involved in the thinking and the problem solving. The award for a young person. I sat next to someone who was a master's student and she won this award for this amazing policy paper. There's nowhere else, I think, on the Canadian landscape right now that is doing this in this way, and it's critically important.
That is wonderful. Thank you for being allowing us to interview and share your thoughts about science policy and STEM education and the Black Science Network. Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was wonderful.
Thank you.